The clink of cutlery echoes faintly against porcelain. Outside, the trains slide past Marunouchi like slow veins of light. I'm sitting in a corner room of the station Hotel Tokyo, the kind that still smells faintly of cedar and linen pressed too long ago. There's a hamburger steak cooling on my plate, a single prawn perched beside it like it's wondering what conversation it's just walked into. I take a bite, chew once, twice, and sigh. I have to eat, I tell myself. Otherwise, I'll drown in my own thoughts. Because tonight, Japan has a new leader. Or rather, the same party has chosen a new face to carry the same old spine. Her name is Sanae Takaichi. And yes, you've probably seen her name flash across CNN, BBC, or whatever news app still dares to send alerts after midnight. The headline is simple. Japan's ruling party elects its first female president. Historic, right? A woman at the helm. But here's the question that kept me from finishing this meal. What kind of woman and what kind of helm? The aircon hums. I lean back in the chair. Outside, somewhere down on street level, a taxi door snaps shut. The sound reminds me of punctuation. Final, tidy, deceptive. I think about how the world loves tidy milestones. The first woman prime minister. The youngest CEO. The oldest astronaut. We hang our hope on adjectives because they feel like progress. But sometimes adjectives are disguises. Let's talk about the numbers because numbers rarely flirt. According to the ATSO, Global Gender Gap Report 2025, Japan ranks 118th out of 148 I countries. In the G7, it sits, politely, stubbornly, at the very bottom. Education parity? Sure. Women and men study side by side, collect degrees, learn the same history written mostly by men. But when it comes to economic participation, to political representation, to decision-making power, Japan remains decades behind the conversations it loves to host at international summits. So when a woman rises to lead the Liberal Democratic Party, the world claps. The problem is, the world doesn't always read the fine print, because Takaichi Sanae isn't the kind of woman who calls herself a feminist. She isn't the kind who marches for women's rights or speaks of equality as a living, breathing value. Her campaign was built on phrases like stability, tradition, discipline. Words that sound safe in the same way an empty house sounds quiet. Still, I'll admit it, when I first saw her on the screen, standing behind that podium with the party emblem gleaming like a gold badge, part of me wanted to cheer. Representation matters. To see a woman standing there, unflinching, surrounded by men in grey suits. It tugged at something old in me. Maybe the girl who once believed power could wear lipstick and still change the world. But admiration is not the same as trust. Takaichi's support comes almost entirely from the conservative wing of the LDP, the faction once aligned with the late Shinzo Abe. It's a wing that calls itself patriotic, but often confuses nostalgia with virtue. These are people who talk about restoring Japan's pride, as if pride were a lost object buried under layers of gender quotas and human rights charters. I don't fear patriotism. I fear the kind of patriotism that asks, who doesn't belong? She opposes separate surnames for married couples. To many outside Japan, that might sound like a small cultural quirk, but here, it's the line between individuality and erasure. If you marry, you must take your spouse's surname. Still, in 2025, the law says so, and she insists it should stay that way because family unity matters more than personal identity. But whose unity are we protecting? And who gets to decide what unity looks like? I sip water, watch the condensation trace a line down the glass. There's a bitter aftertaste, not from the meal, but from that phrase. Family values. It's always the same handful of words used to shut the door on someone. Women, queer people, foreigners. They all get caught in that closing hinge. Takaichi says she wants to restore traditional Japanese beauty. It's a poetic way of promising obedience. And yet, she's also the first woman to hold this position. The irony almost sparkles. Do you ever feel that confusion when progress and regression wear the same outfit? When a headline says that female leader and your heart jumps, but then you read the quote underneath and it sinks straight through the floor. During her campaign, she used an example that made international journalists blink. She spoke about foreign tourists attacking deer in Nara, her hometown. She said she couldn't forgive such disrespect. It played perfectly to the crowd, a simple story of outsiders hurting something sacred. But later it turned out the story came from a YouTuber turned city councillor's unfounded claim. The assault never happened. The deer were fine. What wasn't fine was the way that unverified rumour slithered into a national speech. And when confronted, she dodged. No apology, no correction, just a vague nod toward protecting our culture. Imagine that, a nation's future shaped by hearsay about deer. I pushed the plate away. The steak's gone cold. It's not just that one slip. There's a pattern, a quiet rewriting of truth, smoothed over with the varnish of confidence. Years ago, she was introduced on TV as a legislative aide in the US Congress. Later, critics found she'd been a fellow in training, unpaid, not a staffer. She said the title was simply a translation choice, nothing more. Maybe it was. But then journalists dug up interviews and books where she still used that label long after the supposed correction. Even now, some official profiles keep it. Then there's the uncomfortable history. In 1994, she wrote a recommendation for a book titled Hitler's Election Strategy. In 2011, a photograph surfaced of her smiling beside a known neo-Nazi activist. Her explanation? I take pictures with many people. I believe that. Public figures do. But I also believe patterns matter more than accidents. I tilt my head, listening to the low hum of the minibar fridge. It's the sound of persistence, mechanical, tireless, unaware of the heat it generates. That's what this brand of politics feels like, an engine running on outdated fuel, too proud to admit it's overheating. She once declared she would abandon work-life balance to serve Japan. Admirable devotion, perhaps, if it didn't sound so disturbingly self-erasing. She compared herself to a draft horse, a bashooma, something that runs straight, eyes blinkered, muscles bound to duty. I think of that image often, a leader as a horse. If she's the horse, who's holding the reins? The party elders? The ideological ghosts of the 20th century? Or are the citizens merely passengers in the carriage she's pulling, unsure where we're going but too polite to ask her to stop? Sometimes I envy horses. At least they can sense danger before it arrives. Do you ever wonder what progress would look like if it had a voice? Would it sound like applause? Or silence finally breaking? Her supporters say she represents resilience. They describe her as tough, uncompromising, disciplined, but toughness without empathy is just armour. And armour worn too long turns into skin. I imagine her office tonight, the flags, the polished table, the cameras waiting outside. She must know the weight of history on her shoulders, the first female title carved beside her name. I want to believe she feels pride, but I also want her to feel responsibility, not to her party, but to every woman who will be measured against her legacy. The thing about symbols is they're never empty. They're filled with the expectations of others. When a woman reaches power in a country where equality is still a promise written in pencil, she carries not only her own convictions, but every silence that came before her. And if she uses that platform to uphold the very walls that kept women out, it isn't progress. It's theatre. Maybe it's unfair to expect one woman to fix an entire system. But then again, she didn't have to inherit it unchanged. She chose to. And that's what frightens me the most. Not that she is a woman leading Japan, but that she is a woman leading Japan backwards. Have you ever watched someone win and felt loss instead? Every 30 seconds, my brain swings between irony and sadness. There's the headline, first woman to lead Japan's ruling party. And beneath it, the footnote, advocates against separate surnames, questions, equality initiatives, frames a nationalism as care. How does that combination even coexist? Maybe that's the puzzle of modern politics. We applaud representation even when it represents the very thing we fear. I take a sip of lukewarm tea. It tastes faintly metallic, the way train stations smell after midnight. Do you know that taste? It's the flavour of endurance. I'm trying to be fair. Really, I am. Maybe she believes in stability more than change. Maybe she truly thinks order is kindness. But order without inclusion is just silence wearing a badge. There's a loneliness to power that people rarely mention. Men in politics often drown it with ego. But women, especially women surrounded by men, learn to compress it into poise. Watching her on television, I noticed the precision of her smile. It wasn't warmth. It was strategy. And maybe that's what frightens me most, how easily survival becomes performance. Do you ever think about what you'd become if the world rewarded you only for obedience? Because that's the trap. You rise by blending in, not by standing out. You inherit the structure you once wanted to dismantle, and when the applause finally comes, you can't tell if it's for you or for the system that used you as proof of its progress. Sometimes I want to believe she could still surprise us. People evolve. Perhaps power will teach her empathy. Perhaps scrutiny will refine her conviction. But her first speeches don't suggest it. They sound rehearsed by ghosts, the voices of Abe, of bureaucrats, of an era that mistakes obedience for strength. She's called Japan's Iron Lady. But I keep remembering that iron rusts, slowly, quietly, then all at once. I imagine asking her one question. When you talk about protecting Japan, whom are you protecting it from? Because if the answer is from women who want equality or from foreigners who misstep, then we're not protecting the nation. We're protecting fear. And fear makes for terrible policy. Maybe she believes she's the heroine of this story. Maybe she thinks history will thank her for being the first. But I've learned that being first is not the same as being right. And yet, part of me wants to forgive her, because I see in her the same hunger I once felt. The desire to be seen, to matter, to prove that a woman can stand where men once stood. The tragedy is that she's proving it by becoming one of them. Anyway, my dinner's gone cold. My tea too. But somehow, speaking this out loud feels warmer than either. And to you, the one listening in the dark, perhaps on a train, perhaps in bed, thank you for staying with me. I know the world feels heavy tonight. It does to me too. But heaviness means we're still carrying something worth saving. So, if you'd like to help me keep talking, keep questioning, you can find me beyond this broadcast. On YouTube, membership, and on OnlyFans, I share another side of these nights. Slower, softer, sometimes mischievous, sometimes tender. It's where I can meet you a little closer without the noise of headlines between us. Join me there if you'd like. Support helps me keep the lights on, literally and metaphorically. For now,
Okay, I wasn't gonna say anything, but you watched to the end again and still not subscribe. I mean, do you not like me? No, I'm kidding. Just maybe do it, please. It makes me really happy when you do.